introduce our speaker for today. His name's Willie. Willie Johnson. I've known him since 2013, something like that. We met in college through campus ministry. And since then, we both got married and had a kid. And his family's with him here today. I'm going to let him introduce them. So guys, this guy, he deserves our utmost respect and attention. And so, please welcome with me our speaker, Willie.
Thank you for the hand claps. Appreciate it. Let's say a prayer and then we'll hop in. Lord, I pray that you would be with me today. Lord, I pray that you would let us hear from you. Let our hearts and our ears be open to what you have to say. Lord, I do pray that this message will speak specifically to people and that you will keep us attentive to what your Spirit is doing today. In Jesus' name, amen. Like you said, my name is Willie Johnson. I've been in St. Louis for 7 years, came to St. Louis, 7, 8 years. Came to St. Louis after I graduated college. Really love this city. It's a great city. I'm very thankful the Lord brought me here. I'm currently on staff at Apostles Church in North City. And, I get to work with students and I do outreach with the community center. That's kind of my day-to-day. Earlier today I was painting, stuff like that, so I do all kinds of stuff. But I want to share a little bit about my family. As you can see, that's us at the zoo. That's my wife Rachel and my son Malachi. And you can't tell in the picture, but we have another one on the way. We do not have a name, so if you want to come to me afterwards and volunteer your name, that would be welcome. I want to tell y'all a little bit about how me and Rachel met. I saw y'all have a soiree or something going on with Valentine's Day. I want to tell this story so that you don't do what I did. So me and Rachel met when we were 15. So almost half our life now. I'm almost 30. It's been a while. We've been married for 7 years. We met at Culver's. Anybody know Culver's? Shout out, yeah. Butterburgers, drenched in butter. Yeah. Anyway, and it's not ice cream, it's custard. Don't go in there saying you want some ice cream, because you'll get kicked out. But anyway, we met at Culver's, and I was the person that would take the trays to the people after they order the food. So Culver's, you go to the register, you order, and then they bring you food. You got a question? What's up? What made me what? No? That was much later on in a much different story. But I'll tell you how I got her number. So she was sitting on break, and I was running some food, and this is a true story. She really does not like me telling the story. And she says that it didn't happen, but it did, because I was there. She was sitting on break. I was running some food. I took out my cell phone, slid it on the table, and I said, you know what to do. And she knew what to do. And I got her number. And later on I called her, and that's how our romance started. All that to say, God redeems things. Amen? Thank God for his redemption. That was super bad. And I say that as a warning to you all. You might think you smooth, young men. Ask somebody before you do something like that. Because you might just have to tell the story for the rest of your life. But yeah, we have been married for 7 years. And, I'm really thankful for her. You asked me how did I know she was the one. I believe the Lord told me she was the one. And really thankful for her. But I want to share a little bit about my life. And as we jump in, we'll get to our text. If you have a Bible, you can turn to John chapter 9. We'll start in verse 1. But my life has been hard. I grew up with a single mother with 5 other siblings, so she had 6 kids by herself. My mother was verbally and physically abusive. None of our dads helped with bills, so you have 6 different men who are not helping take care of their children. I don't know how you find that, but that was our case. We ended up homeless for a couple years. Hey, this is Malachi. He's saying hello. And our family was separated, so my sisters were someplace, I was someplace else. My little brother and little sister were at another place. But the worst thing about growing up for me was growing up without a dad. Because I didn't have the necessary love and affirmation that I needed. Fast forward to my 20s, our families suffered loss and loved ones. And even as a believer, we kind of we have been going through really tough times. Now I'm at the point where I'm asking God, what's next for me? God, how will you provide for my family as I have, 2 children? And I'm asking God, why is it so hard? Many of you are familiar with my story. For others, you have a different story, but there are certain things where you question God about. If you're like me, you've asked God, why is this happening to me? I want to ask you guys a question. What causes you to question God? Just name some things. Some things you see that cause you to question God. Life, okay? Let's get a little bit more specific. What in life that causes you to question God? Feelings. Somebody said depression. Death of family members. Let's get 2 more. I know y'all thinking stuff. Go ahead. Suffering. That's a good one. Yeah, absolutely. All right, one more. Illness. Absolutely. Very, very good. When things like that happen, when we go through hard things, we all start to question God a little bit. And asking these questions reminds me of a young man in John chapter 9. We'll start in verse 1. I'm going to summarize the story because I don't have a ton of time and I want to actually cover the story. But please go home and read the whole chapter. It's just one chapter. It will really bless you. It's really good for answering questions like these. Before we start, I want you guys to imagine this story. I want you to imagine you found the Bible on the ground. You don't know what it is. You've never heard of it. And you open the Bible up. It's just a book you found on the ground. You open the Bible up. And you read or hear this story. I want you guys to hear this with fresh ears. Imagine you just opened this up, a random book. All right, let's hop in. So Jesus is walking around with his disciples, and they see a man who was born blind. So this man has never, ever seen anything. And he's begging. The disciples stop, and they say, Jesus, who sinned, this man or his parents? Can you imagine people taking one look at you and saying, somebody sinned? They look at your circumstance and they look at you and say, well, somebody sinned. That's really harsh. But at the time, the belief was if you were born with an illness or you died in an unfortunate way, that somebody had to sin. This seems weird, but we adopt this belief unknowingly for others and for ourselves. This is the question we ask God. What did I do to deserve the circumstances that I have been born with? And I hope that resonates with you guys. What did I do to deserve the circumstances I have been born with? Why am I poor? Why was I born to a mother who was an addict? Why did my dad leave me? Why are people born with illness? Why are people deaf? Why are people born without limbs? Often the answer others give us is that there's sin in the world. But I want to look at what Jesus says to this young man. When asked that question, he says to the disciples, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This was done that God's works might be displayed in him." In other words, God was going to use his circumstances to make a statement about himself. So back to the story. All right, fresh ears. Back to the story. It says Jesus spits in the mud, and that's where you should stop and be like, he did what? If you're hearing this for the first time, we're talking about a blind man, and all of a sudden now Jesus is spitting in the mud, or spitting in the dirt to make mud. What did he do next? Who knows the story? Yeah, I thought you wanted to say something. He wiped the mud on his eyes. That's correct. Good job. So verse 6, it says, after saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva. Y'all like that word, saliva. And put it on the man's eyes. Verse 7, Jesus told him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Now this is important. Some of y'all like, Jesus, don't wipe the spit mud in my eyes, I just stay blind, right? Because that's nasty. Guess what? Jesus doesn't say anything to him. He just does it. He doesn't say, hey, you mind if I rub some spit dirt in your eyes? Then you won't have to be blind. He doesn't say, hey, do you want to be healed? This will make things better. He doesn't say anything. He just does it. Which communicates that this miracle was for the blind man, but it also was for the disciples to see Jesus' power. Now in our lives, sometimes our situation that God works out is for us, but it's also for others around us to see what God does. So verse 7 states that Jesus tells the man to go wash in the pool of Siloam. So imagine this, and this is the part where people miss. Jesus wipes the spit mud on this gentleman's eyes. So he's blind, and if he could see anything at all, now he really can't see because he has mud in his eyes. And Jesus says, he leaves him there and says, hey, go wash in the pool of Siloam. The man can't see, he's blind. So how is he getting there? Right? He has mud on his face. So imagine this is you. Actually, I just need a volunteer. Can I get a volunteer, please? Why you raise your hand? My man right here. No, come on up. Yep, come on up. Yeah, right. I actually brought some spit mud with me to put on your eyes so we don't gotta imagine. I'm just joking, bro. Go ahead and sit down. But I say that in all seriousness, Jesus put the mud on his eyes and he still had to act in faith to be healed. As he was finding his way to the pool, think about this. Could he have thought, what am I doing? Why am I listening to this guy? Is this really going to work? I have spit mud on my face. See, there had to be times where he second-guessed what he was doing. In our lives, we second-guess following Jesus, right? We second-guess, like, is it really worth it? Is it worth it to save myself to marriage? Is it worth it not to drink and do drugs like the other folks I know do? Is it worth it to wash my eyes and what I take in? Is it worth it to stop listening to certain music that I shouldn't be listening to? Is it worth it to tell the truth to my parents? Is it worth it to have Is it worth it to share with folks that I am depressed or I am struggling? Is it worth it to talk to my pastor? We ask, is it really worth following Jesus? We ask questions like, we say things like, I've been praying and I got nothing. God, I don't hear you. God, do you care about me? And just like him, we have to keep walking, not by sight, but by faith. When we feel like giving up and it looks impossible, if Jesus told us to do it, we just keep walking. All in all, this man's desperation drove him to be healed and drove him into faith in Jesus. Sometimes, and this is serious, I want y'all to not miss this point. Sometimes we won't have faith in God until he allows us to be desperate for him. Sometimes that means the Lord is going to squeeze and take everything else away from us that we depend on outside of him until we place our faith in him. I imagine some of you guys are going through that right now. But God knows that situation that we are in will push us to faith in him. So let's talk about what happens next. The man is healed after he washes in the pool, and he is walking around, and people begin to ask, isn't that the man who used to beg and the man who was born blind? Because they see him walking around, and obviously something is different because he's walking around as if he's not blind. The man says to them, I am the man, and the one they called Jesus made spit mud and told me to wash in the pool, and now I can see. The amazing thing about this story, please don't miss this. The amazing thing about this story is that from that point on, when that man was healed, he became a billboard for God's power. Everywhere he went, people would see that his life was changed, and now he is a billboard for God's power. I can see the joy he had when he saw his parents for the first time. I can see his neighbors smiling every time they saw him come out of the house like, man, God is good. Look at him. His circumstances were not because that he sinned or his parents sinned, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. As we continue in the story, later people who cared more about religious rules and regulations will start to criticize Jesus. They would call the man's parents in and they would say, how is it that he was healed? And they were afraid, so they said, well, ask him. He can tell you. They called him in and they began questioning him how he was healed, as if he had done something wrong. And they began questioning him because he was healed on the wrong day, according to them. He was healed on the Sabbath, which was supposed to be a day of no work. And instead of rejoicing with the man, they began to accuse him. They began to say, what happened? And they're like, basically, almost calling him a liar. And they say that Jesus is a sinner, so he could not have healed him. And this is what the man says to them. This is so cool. The man says, speaking of Jesus, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I know, I was blind, but now I see. I was blind, but now I see. That statement will go on to become one of the most recognizable song lyrics ever recorded. What song am I talking about? I was blind, but now I see.
Amazing Grace.
Amazing Grace. The song is called Amazing Grace. You guys probably know Amazing Grace. The cool thing about that song is one of the most popular songs in the world. One of the most recognizable songs in the world. And the cool thing about the story is God is still using that man's story for his glory. To this day, he is using that man's story. When we place our faith in Jesus, he uses our negative circumstances and makes our lives a statement for his amazing grace. As I wrap up, I want to draw your attention to John 9:39 and verse 41 through 41. This story has multiple levels. It has multiple meanings. As you continue to read, Jesus says this to the Pharisees. He says, for judgment I have come into this world, so that the blind will see, and that those who see will become blind. Some of the Pharisees who heard him say this asked, "What? Are we blind too?" Jesus said, "If you were blind, you would not be guilty of sin. But now that you claim to see, your guilt remains." And that's this really, really kind of wordy statement. But Jesus uses the man's physical blindness to communicate a spiritual truth. Jesus came into the world to give sight to those who desperately acknowledge their spiritual blindness. This is really important for you guys. He came to give sight to those who desperately acknowledge their spiritual blindness, meaning you can do nothing outside of Christ. You have no righteousness, if you know what that word means. You are not good on your own. You're not good enough on your own, but you need Christ. But to those who claim to see, who believe they are good without Christ, he promised judgment. See, the Pharisees could physically see, but they were blind to who was right in front of them. As I close, I want you guys to remember, all of us are blind and helpless in our sin. But through faith in Christ, we are healed and gain spiritual sight. And we too can have the same story as the blind man. I once was blind, but now I see.